Hello and welcome back to my channel. I hope you all had a very Merry Christmas and you had a good New Year's celebration. It's 2025 and so I wanted to do one of those videos where I review all of the books that I read in last year in 2024. I read 110 books last year and I thought trying to review every single book would make this video way too long, and just the thought of having to do that 110 times sounds very daunting to me. So instead of doing every book I read in 2024, I'm just going to do my favorites. Actually, before we get started, I'm just going to go on to my Goodreads 2024 year in books and just share that with you. So I read 110 books. As I said, for me that was 36,194 pages, and this was a really big accomplishment for me. When I first started this year, I loved reading. I've always loved reading since I was a little girl, but it wasn't a obsession for me like it is now. Like now I'm like obsessed with reading and I love reading, and it's like one of my personalities is just reading. And so that didn't happen until May of this year. It all started whenever my husband and I were traveling a lot at the beginning of the year, and so in the car while we were going very long distances, like 6 to 10 hours, we would be in the car and I would just read the whole time basically. And so that is where my love of reading started. I remember setting a goal at the beginning of the year for 30 books and like being like, that's not going to happen. And then little did I know, it happened so fast, and I continued to make my goal higher until I set it for 100 books. The shortest book that I read was Christmas is for Suckers. It's a 70-page book, and it was also my least shelved book. It's not a very popular book. It's written by a high school student, I believe, and I talked about it a little bit in my Reading for 24 Hours Christmas edition video, so you can watch that for well, I don't even think I really give a review for it even in that video. But anyway, so that's the shortest book. And then the longest book was A Court of Wings and Ruin by Sarah J Maas, and that one was 703 pages. I remember that being so daunting to me and like thinking that was so much. This year I hope to read a few longer books. I want to try Throne of Glass this year, so that's on my TBR for me to read this year. But my average book length in 2024 was 329 pages. I feel like it is a little bit higher than that, but at the end of the year I just read a whole bunch of small novellas, and I feel like that's why it's a little bit lower. I'm starting to make a book blanket for 2024. I saw this idea and I wanted to do it for 2025, but the original book blanket idea has granny squares, and I don't know how to make granny squares. I'm not super great at crocheting, and so granny squares I'm not good at, but I want to teach myself this year and do it for 2025. But before that, I wanted to do a 2024 blanket too, because this is the year that really started my love for reading. So as I listen to audiobooks, I've been working on this blanket. I can't believe I'm sharing it because I'm actually kind of cringed out by it, but this is what it looks like so far. And the colors, to me, I hate it because I feel like they all clash. But I just use scrap yarn that I have, and I do the best I can to make them mimic the covers. Because I didn't know how to do granny squares yet, I decided to just do rows. And so I do a row for each 100 pages of books. I round to the nearest 100. If it's 320 pages, then I do 3 rows. And if it's 360 something pages, then I round up and do 400 pages. So near the end, it should even out to about the amount of pages that I've read. But this is it so far. The pattern that I followed, I can have all of this in the description. I'm going to try to remember to include everything that I talk about in the description. But the pattern that I saw for this has like 110 stitches or something, and I definitely wish I would have made it a little bit longer because this blanket is going to be super long this way but not very wide this way. Anyway, so this is my 2024 book blanket that I'm working on. I'll mostly work on that while I watch TV or if I listen to any audiobooks. And then as I finish books in 2025, I will make a granny square for each book after I complete it. For that blanket, I'm doing 1 row for each 100 pages. I've done a lot of 4 rows rather than 3 rows. There's been a few 3 rows, but a lot of them are 4 rows. So I actually have read 350 pages to like 450 pages for most of my books, which is actually pretty surprising. But anyways, back to this video. The average rating that I had for 2024 was 3.9 stars, which is kind of crazy, but at the same time, I think realistic. I give Laud a 4 stars, and that's just the easiest thing for me to do, is just give it a 4 star. I feel like when I start reading a book, that's where I already think that it's a 4 star, and then if it disappoints me, that's whenever I drop my rating. And if it does something really great that I love, then I will increase my rating. And then my first review of the year was With Every Letter by Sarah Sundin, and this was the book that sparked my interest for reading. And after reading this book specifically is whenever I started like binge reading, and as soon as I was done with one book, I would go into the next and into the next, and like I spent every spare minute that I had reading, and that's the book that started it. So there's that. Another thing that I do want to say before I get into my favorite books of the year is I didn't start really reading until May, and so there's some books that I read before then. I just didn't have my Goodreads account then, so I don't really remember my ratings, and so for some of them I know that they were a high rating for me. I just didn't actually rate them, and I don't have any written reviews of them. So the first book that I read of 2024 was Reunion by Karen Kingsbury, and it is the 5th book of the Redemption series, which is like the first part series of the Baxter family series. And so I started that in 2023. So I've been reading it since 2023, and I'm hoping this year to finish all of the Baxter books. I've really enjoyed the family and reading them. But so I read that book, Reunion, and then I read the Firstborn series, which comes right after that, and that is Fame, Forgiven, Found, Family, and there's one other one, but it's somewhere different on my Goodreads for some reason, so I don't remember that, but I'll have it on the screen. And then right after that is the Sunrise series, which has Sunrise, Summer, Someday, and Sunset. And then the next book that I read was The Sweet Life by Suzanne Woods Fisher. This is the first book of the Cape Cod Creamery series, and I remember not caring for that book much. I did end up reading the second book of the series as well, and I think I do want to finish it. I think there's one more book that I plan to read this year, but I didn't care for it that much. It was okay. It was probably a 3-star read for me, or a 3.5. And then the last one that I read before I started my Goodreads account is A Castaway in Cornwall, and this book is a 5-star book for me. I remember loving it so much. I stayed up till very late hours of the night reading this book. I loved it so much. So with all that being said, we are now into what I read from May until December, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with my least favorite to my all-time favorite book that I read for 2024, and these are all of my favorite books that I've read. Around 20 books that I have that are all of my favorites. So let's just get into this because I've already been talking a whole lot. At number 20 we have So This Is Love by Elizabeth Lim. This is part of a Twisted Tale series. I don't know if you know what that is, but I was introduced to it last year by my sister because she bought a few of them, and I was like, that is so interesting, and I saw that this one was on Kindle Unlimited, and so I read it, and you might hear me talk more about it in this video. I don't remember which one it is. I'll have it on the screen. And it's just basically the Cinderella story, but I think it's if she never tried on the slipper. Like when the prince goes and every woman in the town or whatever tries on the slipper, Cinderella didn't try it on. All of these Twisted Tale books have like the fairy tale Disney stories that we know, and then it's something like that. And I got 2 more books for Christmas of the Twisted Tale series that I'm so excited. I asked specifically for the Frozen one and for the Tiana one. I'm going to go get them real quick. My husband got these books for me, and I can't wait to read them. So this is the Frozen one, and it's called Conceal Don't Feel. And it says, what if Anna and Elsa never knew each other? So that was interesting to me. And then I also got the Tiana one. It's called Almost There. And it says, what if Tiana made a deal that changed everything? So I'm guessing this is if she took the deal that Dr. Facilier gave to her. So it's just very interesting. I liked the Cinderella one. I think I'm going to like these ones even more. Number 19 is The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. I decided last year that I wanted to read The Chronicles of Narnia, and I've never read those before, and I've heard of them. I know that they're kind of popular, so I bought like this, all of them, and they're all in one. I haven't actually read them all yet, and they're in a different order than what Goodreads has, so I was reading it in the Goodreads order, and then now I want to read it in in that book order. I want to read this series with my little sister Ariel. I think she'll really enjoy it. And she's not super into reading, so it's like my goal in life to make her like reading. And so I've been trying to introduce her to books that I liked as a kid or that I read now that I think she'll like. I somehow forgot to talk about the next book, which is Little Women. I actually listened to this book on audiobook. The Audible version that I listened to, I really recommend. It had like different actors for each character. The way it was read, you don't get confused as to who is talking because the voices change for each character. And I just really enjoyed it a lot. There are some things that happen in the book that I was not expecting and that I was not wanting to happen. If you know, you know. If you have read Little Women before, you probably know what I'm talking about, and maybe you feel the same way. That's like the only negative thing about it. I actually really enjoyed it. It's probably one of the best classic books that I've read. Number 17 is Pumpkin Spice and Not So Nice. This is a book that I read during the fall time, and I remember just wanting to read a whole bunch of fall books. I think I only ended up reading three or four. This is one that was exactly what I was looking for. It was the perfect cozy fall read. If you're looking for a comfy, cozy fall book, put this on your TBR to read in October of this year because it was perfect for me. It didn't have spice in it, but it might have had some language in it. Number 16, and if you watched my 24-hour reading video where I read Christmas books, at the end of the video I was listening to an audiobook of A Royal Christmas Wedding, and I ended up finishing it. It did end up being one of my favorite reads of 2024. And I didn't put any of the other Christmas books that I read in this video because I do have a whole separate video that talks about all of the Christmas books that I read, and I talk about my favorites in it. So if you want to check out more Christmas books that you might like, you can go watch that video. But because I never gave a rating for this book, I did end up keeping it in this video. I ended up loving it so much, and I'm really disappointed that I didn't continue reading the second book or the third book of the series because it was so good. I really enjoyed it a lot. So number 15 was Once Upon a Prince, which is the first book of the series, and I just remember liking it. I don't remember a whole lot about it, but I just remember liking it, and it was 5 stars. Both books are really good. I wish I would have read the whole series, and I would recommend reading the whole series. Of course, I tried reading the second book, and I didn't like it, but I thought it was about a completely different person and a completely different story. But the first book and the fourth book tie into each other, so obviously those 2 books in between do have something to do with each other. So I wish I would have known that and read all of them. I don't really see the point in doing that now since I have already read the 4th book, but that doesn't mean that I won't do it. Number 14 is When Twilight Breaks by Sarah Sundin. You will see a lot of Sarah Sundin's books on here because there's not a single one that I have not given 5 stars to. She definitely is one of my favorite authors. She writes about World War II historical fiction, and she is a Christian author, so all of her books are clean. And I just really enjoy her writing style. A lot of her books will have 2 different people that she follows, the male and the female. I'm a person that doesn't really care for that writing style, but with her, I like it. So this book I remember being my least favorite of the Sarah Sundin books that I have read. This one is a standalone one, and I have found that I haven't liked the standalone ones as well as I like the ones that follow a series. And I am someone who just loves series. I hate the ending after you read a book and not knowing what happens next, so I love series for that. This is a really good book. I definitely recommend it, especially if you like historical fiction. And even if you don't like historical fiction, I would so recommend Sarah Sundin because I think she would make you like it. Number 13 is actually a non-fiction book. It is How to Ruin Your Life by 30. It is so crazy for a nonfiction to even be on this list because I do not read a lot of nonfiction. If I do read a nonfiction, even if I like it a lot, I'm not going to necessarily rate it a 5 star. But this book, I remember reading it all in one sitting. I have never done that with a nonfiction book before. It's like reverse psychology where it like says, if you want to do this, then do this. But like, obviously this is what not to do. So that's what this is. So if you are 30 or under, or even if you're older, I think this is a really good book. But especially if you're a teenager or a young adult, I really recommend this book for you because I remember like, right after I graduated, being a teenager, like things like that, this book would have been very useful for me. But even as someone who's just entered their 20s, I think it's very helpful. For any age that you are, I definitely recommend this book. It was very, very easy to read. Number 12 is Leaving by Karen Kingsbury. This one is part of a series. This is the first part of the Bailey Flanagan series. And this series comes right after the Baxter Family series. I don't think that's what it's actually called, but it's where you follow the Baxter family in their early years. After that, they move on to Bailey Flanagan series, and it talks about her. In this book, she's going to Broadway, and that's basically all that I remember about it. But anyway, it just follows her. She is a young adult. There's a lot of things about this character that are cringy because like she's almost too perfect. But at the same time, I like it a lot. I would recommend that whole series by Karen Kingsbury. It's really, really good, and this one is one of my favorite books out of the whole series. When I was putting all of these together, I was putting books that I remembered or books that I know that I gave 5 stars to on Goodreads, and this book I think I gave 4 stars to on Goodreads. It's called The Forgotten Bookshop of Paris by Daisy Wood, and I remember reading this book, going into it thinking that it was a Christian book, like by a Christian author, but there was a lot of language in it, and so I wouldn't recommend it to just anyone of any age. I just remember being very scarred by reading that, and it made my rating go down because I was going to give it 5 stars. I remember it having a really interesting storyline and I liked it a lot, but I rated it 4 stars because of the language in it. It depends on your style of reading and what you are comfortable with if you want to read that book or not, but I thought I would add it on here just because it's still a book to this day that I remember and I think about. Number 10, this is so funny that this is in my top 10, Amish Healing by Beth Wiseman. I was in a Kindle Unlimited phase and I just loved reading ebooks on Kindle. So I was just finding anything and everything I could on Kindle Unlimited, and I saw this book. It was actually the book that comes after this. It's a sequel, and it had the cutest little dog on the cover, and I was like, I want to read that. So I added it to my wish list because it hadn't yet come out, but the first one did. So I was like, well, I'm going to read this one so I can get ready to read the second one. And I'm so glad I did because I really enjoyed the story. I ended up rating it 5 stars. And then the second book was from the dog's point of view, and so it was a little weird to me. I'm not a huge dog lover, but anyway, it's just so funny to me that that book is in the top 10 because it's not anything that I normally read, and I only read it because I saw a cute dog on the cover. Number 9 is A Court of Mist and Fury by Sarah J. Maas, and this is part of the fantasy series that you have seen me review in multiple videos that I have posted on this channel. My sister got me into the series, starting with our book swap video where she made me read A Court of Thorns and Roses, and to be honest, I did not care for that book. I ended up rating it 4.5, but that was because I wanted to be nice to my sister. I think if I was giving it a real rating, it would be a 3.5. I did not care for that book because I feel like the first book almost leaves you clueless as what did I just read? What does that mean? And then after reading the second book, all the pieces connect. And like, if I were to reread that book again, I think it would be a 4.5. It all makes more sense. But this book, I remember reading it and I loved it so much. I was doing a 24-hour challenge when I first started it, and so I was reading it for long sections at a time, just reading it, and it never made me bored. I liked it a lot. It's not a clean book, and it made me want to read the next book. The next book was a bit of a disappointment. I'm not a fantasy person, but the romance in this book is super cute. There is spice in it, and I just remember skipping those scenes, so I don't even remember like how descriptive it is. So there is that aspect to it, but the romance is so cute, and just watching these two characters fall in love and all the pieces that you were so confused about in book 1 connect was just so awesome. The next book I have rated on Goodreads 4 stars, and I do not know how because I still talk about this book to this day. I love it so much. It's called The Painter's Daughter. I started listening to it on audiobook. My sister-in-law, I don't know if she recommended this book to me or if I just saw that she read it and rated it high, and it intrigued me, so I started listening to it. I didn't think I would really care for it much. I just needed some noise to listen to, but I loved it so much, and I decided to stop listening to the audiobook and actually read it for myself. That way I don't miss anything. I ended up loving it so much. I don't know why I rated it 4 stars. It's definitely a 5-star read, but it's really good. I would recommend it. Number 7 is actually a series, and it's the Wings of Nightingale series. I started talking about this at the beginning of the video. This was the first book that I read with every letter that actually made me start loving reading. I don't think I even liked historical fiction before reading this book, but I liked World War II, so I started reading Sarah Sundin's books, and that's what made me fall in love with historical fiction. Now it is definitely my favorite genre, especially if it has romance in it. you can read my review. So I read the first one and I loved it so much. I'm sorry for the lighting change. My camera died and so it is a little bit different now. But so the first book was about Melly Blake. The next book is about her friend Georgie. And I liked this book even better than the first one. Second book I was not expecting to like as much because it was about her friend Georgie and I hated that character in the first book. But the progression of her character in this book is so good. I ended up giving it 5 stars. I loved it so much. And then the third book might have been my favorite one. This one is about Kay. And you'll meet these characters in book 1. Knowing her backstory of why she is the way she is and seeing her character development was just so good. And just watching them fall in love with each of their love interests is just so adorable. I love it so much. I love this series. I definitely recommend it. It's not one of my favorite series that I read by Sarah Sundin, but it's still so good. Definitely a 5-star series. Number 6 is Authentically Izzy. And this book was made up almost entirely of emails and text messages. And when I first realized that that's the direction that the book was going in, I thought that I wouldn't like it at all. I continued to read it and I ended up loving this book so much. It's kind of like a love triangle between the main character and these 2 other guys. This book is I think by a Christian author. I'm not sure if it's a Christian author, but it is a clean book, no language and no spice, and that's always a plus for me. It was really good. That book is number 6. And now we're going to move into my top 5 books of 2024. Number 5 is Until Leaves Fall in Paris by Sarah Sundin, and this is the first book that I read by her that is a standalone. When I first started reading it, it was very different than the series, and I didn't care for it that much. It wasn't hooking me. It was taking me a very long time to finish. And then as I was reading it, it was the week that I was helping at a summer camp. And so during that week of camp, I wasn't on my phone a lot and I wasn't reading. And so I completely dropped it. And then I came back and it kind of got me in a reading slump because I wasn't reading as much whenever I was at camp. I got a notification that it was due tomorrow, the very next day. And so I think I was at like 50%. So I read like the second half all in one day and it made me bawl my eyeballs out. I am not a crier and books and movies just don't always make me cry, but this book I was sobbing. I was crying so hard I had to stop reading because I couldn't see the words because I was crying so much. And this happened the entirety of the end of the book, like the last few chapters. It was so intense. Definitely recommend it. It's during World War II in Paris. She's Jewish and I think he's German and he has a daughter, and so it's so cute watching them fall in love and then seeing them in danger. It was very good. Number 4 is Heart of a Royal, and this book made me fall in love with the idea of princesses and princes. I'm very new to reading and I'm not on TikTok or anything where I know what all the book slang is. I was recently introduced to tropes, and so this trope is forced proximity trope, and I know some people don't like those, so that's why I'm saying that, but I kind of like the forced proximity trope just because I just feel like it's really cute and like old-fashioned. The way that it all happens I do not like. It's funny because like for me, I'll write a book 5 stars and then I'll start reading other people's reviews and then I'm like, oh yeah, that's right, and it like makes me not like the book as much. And so there were a lot of comments. I remember this from reading this. That's how you know that it's a good book, because I remember it and my memory is super bad, and I read this a long time ago and I still remember this much. I remember reading the other reviews and them talking about the forced proximity part of it and how it happened and the age gap that they have. A lot of people didn't care for that. So I do say those things for people who are not into that stuff and do not like that. But I do remember loving the story and it made me want to read the second one so bad. I still have yet to finish the series just because it was really hard to find it available, and it wasn't until recently that I started buying books. I still really don't buy books, but I plan to start buying books more if I'm not able to get them at the library or borrow them from a friend. All I have to say, this book is very good. I do recommend it. It's a Christian book, but like there is no talk about God or anything the whole time until the end, but I really did enjoy the book and I ended up giving it 5 stars. The next book is Wistress. I saw this book on an Instagram reel. It made me want to love fantasy. If every fantasy book was like this, I would love fantasy. What I don't like about fantasy, they make it almost hard to read with like names and like these big words and like weird spellings. It's really confusing to my small little brain. I remember just loving this book so much. And it's about this girl who has a superpower, and I can't remember, I don't know, I guess the superpower is that if she cries, then she can make a wish. She has to like kind of hide her superpower, I think, and then she gets cursed, and so like if she cries, if she makes a wish, or if she gets emotional, then she dies or something like that. I just remember liking it a lot. If you like fantasy, read it. It is by a Christian author, so it's very clean. Number 2 is the Sunrise at Normandy series, I think. I am very bad at history, and that's why I've never liked historical fiction. I've never liked history, but now as an adult, I love historical fiction, and it's making me love history, and I love learning history in a way that I enjoy, which is fantasy, romance, that kind of stuff. I have learned so much just last year about history, things that I probably already should have known. But anyways, so this book, it like follows D-Day, and I remember talking to my husband, and he was talking about D-Day. I think it was D-Day or something like that. And I was like, what's D-Day? Like, I had no idea. Please don't judge me or flame me for this, because I know I'm stupid. But I had no idea what D-Day was. And so he was trying to explain it to me, and I was like, you know what? I'm just going to read a book about D-Day so I can understand it. And so I found this series, and so it follows 3 brothers, and they're all in the army. They're all, is that what it's called, in the army? The 3 books are called The Sea Before Us, The Sky Above Us, and The Land Beneath Us. So I think the first book is about a brother named Wyatt. His story was my favorite, and that's the first book. The family, it's just very crazy to hear about what happened in the family, and you learn more about it as you read the other books. The second book is about Adler, who is the oldest brother, and how you know it's a good book for me is whenever I stop and tell my husband every single thing about the book. And I remember telling him about this book, like as soon as one page was turned, I told him all about what was going on. He was asking me about what was going on because he was also invested into the story. I like this series even better than the other series that I talked about of Sarah Sundin. It's really good. I would definitely recommend this book. And then my very favorite read of 2024 is the Timeless series by Gabrielle Meyer. I've talked about this before in videos a little bit, but have not gone into detail. And so I'm going to kind of do that now, but also as quickly as I can, because I feel like this video has probably been pretty long. So in this series, it follows a family in a way, kind of. And it's one person at a time, but basically they have 2 different lives. And so they wake up and they're in one time of life, and then they go to sleep and they wake up in a completely different time with different sets of parents, different jobs, a different life. Every single day they alternate their lives until their 21st birthday, where they get to decide in which path they want to stay in. If you haven't read this series before, I definitely recommend it, and you should start with book 1 and read 2. Now there is 4 books, and the 5th book comes out this year. I'm so excited. It's the book that I'm most anticipating to read this year. So I remember reading When the Day Comes, and I saw my sister-in-law posted this book on her story, and she talked about it so high that I was like, I have to try it. And me and my sister-in-law, I feel like our styles are pretty similar, but at the same time, there's some books that she recommends like super duper high, and then I read them and I feel like I'm let down by them. So when I first started reading this book, I thought I was going to be disappointed. And when I first started reading it, I just remember hard words, historical fiction. It was still before I loved historical fiction. I remember reading it and thinking that I wouldn't like it, but the more I read it, the more I was invested, and I loved the idea. Like, just the whole concept of having 2 different lives in history is just so cool to me. I think that the author is a genius for coming up with it. The amount of cliffhangers throughout this whole series, you will be on the edge of your seat anticipating every single word. The first book is probably still my favorite just because it's where I fell in love. And then the second one that I liked next was actually the 4th book, which is Across the Ages. And the first 3 books follow the daughter. So like the first book is about Libby, and then the second one is about her daughter, and so on. But then the fourth book is actually not about the daughter, but it is somebody in the family. I don't want to give too many spoilers because I really think you should read it for yourself. So in a way, this book is not like the other ones at all. It follows Caroline, and she thinks that she's the only time crosser in the world. She does not know that this is a thing. She pretends to be a pirate. Well, not a pirate, but a cabin boy, I think. I don't remember. I'm not really good at words, so bear with me. So it follows that time. Her one time is where she's living as a cabin boy, and then the other time is, I guess, kind of modern day. I can't remember the exact years at the top of my head, but her dad is kind of like a Billy Graham. I don't know if you know who Billy Graham is, but he's like a really famous preacher, and so she has a really famous preacher dad in one life, and then in her other life she lives with her grandfather, and she's trying to find her mom, and she becomes a cabin boy pirate type thing. So the next two, it's hard for me to decide which ones I like more, but I do think I like book 3 more, For a Lifetime. The 2 times for this book, one of them is during the Salem witch trials, and once again, not something that I'm interested in, not something that I even knew much about. And then the other life, she's like a pilot or something like that. When I first started reading this book, I was like, so predictable, and even as I continue to read it, I'm like, I already know what's going to happen. But when you think you know what's going to happen, you don't. Some kind of crazy plot twist happens, and you'll be at the edge of your seat anticipating and wanting to scream and cry and do every single thing that you possibly can. And then the second book, I'm not going to talk much about the second book just because I don't want to give too many spoilers if you don't read the first book, but they all are super good, and I definitely recommend reading them. At some point, I want to do a whole video where I just talk about the Timeless series. I do love talking about this book, and I have told so many people about this book, recommending it to them because I love it so much. I bought multiple copies of When the Day Comes to pass out to my family for Christmas gifts, like because I want them all to read it for Christmas. That's the book I chose for my sister to read in the book swap video. It's just the book that I loved most in 2024, and so the book that I recommend most to other people to read. And I'm so glad that I saw my sister-in-law's review on this and decided to start reading it. Those are all of my favorite books that I've read for 2024. I am so excited for this year of reading. Last year, like I said, I've read 110 books, and so my goal for this year is 120 books. That is 10 books for each month. Last year, I did have a lot of sit down time, and I was not very productive with my life last year. And this year I have a lot more goals, a lot more things that I want to accomplish this year. So I don't know if I will be reading as much, but I do plan to listen to more audiobooks. I do think that this year will be more reading, but at the same time, I don't really just want to read a whole lot of books. I want to enjoy the books that I read. I want to allow myself to DNF books if I do not like them this year. I talked about some books that I'm anticipating to read in the next year, and as I continue to film videos, I will talk about other books. I hope to do more book challenges, maybe do monthly reviews where I talk about all the books that I've read that month. And I have a bullet journal that I'm starting this year where I'm going to do a book bullet journal. Just a lot of exciting things. I love New Year's and fresh starts. I'm still working out all the details on how I'm going to work this YouTube channel, how often I'm going to post. Eventually I will have more of a consistent schedule, but probably for the first month or two I'll probably just post sporadically. So definitely hit the bell so you know whenever I do post a video. Let me know some of your favorite books that you read in 2024. I'd love some more recommendations of books to read in this new year, so definitely do that. And thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.